Let me know if anyone's having issues getting that starter project set up. I'm about to start the lesson. So as I mentioned, today we're going to learn about collection views and user defaults. And in doing so, the first thing we're going to focus on is collection views. So these are the objectives or some of the points which you should understand by the end of this lesson. Let me move this. Okay. So by the end of this lesson, you should understand and explain what a collection view is, along with common scenarios for its use. Implement UICollectionView data source methods to populate a collection view from model data. Implement and customize basic layouts using UICollectionView flow layout. Implement custom UICollectionView cells, and implement a UICollectionView delegate method to react to selecting a collection view cell. So what about collection views is it has a lot of the same naming practices as a UI table view does, in terms of it has a data source and it has a delegate, and it has a lot of commonalities between a UI table view, but it gives you way more power, way more freedom in terms of how you structure your view. So a good example of this, actually, before I exit out of the slides, is Instagram. So hopefully everyone has seen Instagram at least once, even if you don't use it much. But these are good examples of collection view. So you'll see the area on your profile where you have all your pictures and it's in a grid format. That is a collection view. A collection view gives you the flexibility to set up a view like that. And then you see the stories that you would see on your feed up top. That is also a collection view. That's a horizontal collection view. So the one on your profile is a vertical collection view, and the one in the stories area of your feed is a horizontal collection view. So you're gonna learn how to make those today. And maybe you can make your own little Instagram if you wanted to. So first I'm gonna show you the final application, because that's how we usually get started. So this is our final application. It's gonna show you the various planets. So this is our collection view holding our different planet cells. And as you'll see, the cells are different from a UI table view cell in the fact that you can have more than one cell on the same row. And that's some of that added flexibility that UI collection views give you. That'll prove to be very powerful later on as you learn more things and build more things. And so that's one difference between a UI table view and a collection view, is you can have more than one cell in a row. You can change the size of the row, the cell, so that this happens. With the UI table view, you don't really have that flexibility. And also we have this button over here, the settings button, and it asks us, do you want Pluto, is Pluto a planet? So you can turn on yes or no, or basically a switch, and this has like a binary logic or like Boolean logic where it's like true or false. So it's going to turn it on and off, and based off if you turn it on, when you go back to the previous view, you'll see Pluto at the bottom. So it's up to you whether you wanted to include Pluto as a planet or not. And if you decide not to include Pluto as a planet, you will not see it among the collection view. And so we're going to learn how to build this pretty simple application, or at least it'll seem a lot simpler once we're done with the lesson. First, we're gonna look at our starter project. Everyone go ahead and start looking through the code if you haven't already, and you'll notice that we have these folders over here. So we have our view controller folder, our model folder, and our model controller folder, and our resources folder. So in noticing that we have our view controllers folder, our model, and our model controllers folder, we notice that most likely we're going to continue to follow that MVC pattern, that model view controller pattern that we learned about in previous lessons. And as I expand those groups, I can see what files are within each folder. And so I see I have my planet model. That'll come in really useful when I'm trying to create those planets. Let me actually exit out of some of these screens. When I'm trying to create my planets for my cells, of course. And then I have my planet controller. This contains all my planet data. So you'll see my planet model consists of a name and an image. And then I have my model controller. Does anybody remember the job of a model controller? Come on, anyone?
Forgot.
Okay, so in a model view controller pattern, development pattern, you have the model, the view, and the controller. And in this particular case, we have a view, we would potentially have view controllers and a model controller. And so a view controller controls the view. So what does a model controller do?
Control the model.
Exactly. So that's going to control all the data that is constructed for your app. So that's why it holds all of these models, all of these planet models. And remember last time when we did the model view controller setup, we had it in such a way that the planet controller, which is our model controller, will be called inside of a view controller. And so eventually when we get to that point, hopefully it'll remind you of the importance of a model controller. But now I'm going to look in the storyboard. So here we're gonna look in the storyboard, see what we have already. It looks as though the only thing that's already available in our storyboard is the settings view controller. So remember, you have this settings view controller that shows up to allow us to toggle that is Pluto a planet setting to be able to show up that show that extra cell with Pluto. So so we already have that view controller, but we also want this view controller that has all the planets on it. So I'm going to introduce that view controller. That view controller, I'm going to come up here to our library, and I'm going to type in UI collection view controller. So here we see our UI collection view controller. Make sure that you guys are specifically dragging this one in, not the collection view by itself, but the whole controller. Remember how there was a UI table view controller and then there was a UI table view well, it's the same concept with a UI collection view controller. The UI collection view controller already has everything connected, but if we wanted more flexibility in how the collection view showed up, that's when we would use a collection view, just like for our UI table view controller versus using a UI table view. So here we go. We've pulled in our UI view controller, and we ideally want to be able to navigate to this screen and of course populate our planet cells. So I'm going to embed this UI view controller into a navigation controller. But before I do that, let's look at this controller a little bit. So this UI view controller already has this thing called UI collection view in it. And in this UI collection view, it has a cell that's associated with it, much like a UI table view or a UI table view controller would already have a table view in it with a cell associated with it. It's the same concept. In terms of that. The only difference here is you get a little more flexibility. So if you come over here into your attributes inspector section, you can see that you have different things that you have access to, such as like the number of items in your collection view, the layout, which you can have a flow. We're using a flow today, or you can have a custom layout. And that is really refers to that grid layout that I was referring to earlier when I showed you the example of the Instagram layout for your profile. That was considered a grid layout. And you can actually come to your definitions here, and you'll see that it defines it as a concrete layout object that organizes items into a grid with optional header and footer views for each section. So much like a table view, it organizes the data into sections and rows, but you have a little more flexibility with how it's built out in terms of it'll be built out like a grid system, as we saw and on here. So this would be considered like a grid system. And so now I'm going to embed this in a UI navigation controller. Let me know if you have any questions about what you've heard thus far. So I embedded this UI collection view controller and a navigation controller. And of course, now I want to have the ability to navigate to this settings view controller. So how would I introduce a way to navigate to that settings view controller?
Segue.
Yes, exactly, a segue. So in the application that we're trying to replicate, it has a settings button. So we're going to introduce a bar button item in order to get that. Pull that in, and we're going to retitle it settings. And now we're going to do a control click. Let me turn on my thing. So control click, drag over here, and I'm going to create a segue. So I don't know if you guys noticed, but this wasn't a transition that we've done before with segues. This is considered, or at least I don't think, maybe we have, but if we haven't, this is considered, it's presenting modally. So we want to make sure that when we have the settings view controller present, it's doing it modally. So I'm going to click control, drag over, and I'm going to select the present modally segue. So here we are good to go with our navigation. We'll have our settings button up there, and it'll navigate to our should Pluto be a planet. The next thing I want to do is create the associated, the next thing I want to do is create my custom cell. So right here, I'm gonna have my custom planet cell, and based off the, I'm gonna close this out. Based off this application, my cell looks like it consists of a planet image and a planet name. And of course, that's exactly what's in our model as well. So in looking at this cell, how would you go about anybody want to walk me through how I would create that custom cell?
Put a stack view in there.
I'm sorry?
You mean the stack?
Yes. I'm sorry?
Are you
I thought I heard.
you're talking about the storyboard?
Yeah, so the cell, I thought I heard someone say.
Yeah, Ben says in a stack view.
Yeah, So yep, I would use a stack view because we see that that image is stacked right on top of that label. So the easiest way to get the layout that we want would be a stack view. So I'm going to bring a vertical stack view in, pull that in there. Now I want to make sure that my vertical stack view is constrained to the cell so that it kind of forces that cell to grow with it. Hopefully you guys remember doing this, working with auto layouts. If not, here's a little quick refresher and let me know if you don't remember any of these things or if you have questions about setting up auto layouts. Hopefully everyone feels pretty comfortable with them at this point. So after I do my stack view, what would be the next thing I would add?
A label.
A label, okay. Yep, I want my label for my planet name, and the label was also centered, so I'm going to make sure it's centered. And then I have one more thing that I might want to add.
Image view.
Exactly. Yep, an image view. So I'm going to add this image view, and I'm going to add some constraints to my image view to make sure that my cell as well as my stack view adheres to the size of my image view. So I'm going to add I'll add an aspect ratio. So I don't know if I've gone over this before, but an aspect ratio is a type of constraint in which it controls the growth of the image. So, or it controls the growth of whatever you're constraining. So in this particular case, it's a UI image view, and you're saying that if I went here, so if I click on the constraint and then I went here to my, or another way, I could just click on the UI image view itself and then go to my size inspector. I come down here and I can actually edit this image view, and it's this this multiplier is fine, but to make it more evident what type of aspect ratio I'm creating, I'm gonna do a 1-to-1 ratio. So basically I'm saying that this is a perfect square and that anytime the height grows, so does the width. So it's 1-to-1. If I did 4-to-3, then I'm saying that my width is growing 4 times more than my height. And so I think I'll stick with the 1-to-1. And you'll also notice that it kind of made my label go away. So that might mean I need to expand my cell. So let me do that. So now it's actually in the center. Hold on. And this is actually important too. The fact that it went to the center. Hold on 1 second. It's like, covering my label. So I'm gonna keep it at 4 to 3 for now, just because I don't want to play with it too much. But you'll see how important this is in a second. So now I'm going to add an image to my image view. So I'm going to click on my image, come over here to my attributes inspector, and I'm going to search for an image right here in this image area. So I'm going to put in, I'm going to do Saturn. So here you see my Saturn is completely, it looks pretty good with my aspect ratio and everything. And this is because of this content mode. So if you look at your attributes inspector and you come down to the view in this content mode right here, there's different content modes that you can choose. So there's a scale to fill. So that's how it look with the scale to fill. Doesn't look that bad, but it definitely looks more stretched out. So that wouldn't be as appealing as aspect to fit. There's also aspect fill, and that kind of cuts off the view. There's all these different types, right? And you just have to figure out which one will get the end result that you want. And so today we're going with the aspect fit, but I definitely wanted you guys to be aware of that important property of an image view.
Stop here real quick.
I'm
So, sorry. What's happening on my screen is a little bit different. For some reason, the collection view cell is resizing with everything that I add into it. And it's changing position too. So I'm not sure if I missed something or if that's normal.
Mine went to the center too. Like when I dragged it in, it made it like bigger and then moved my collection view cell to like the center. I'm trying to get it to that top left corner.
Yeah, when I added the Saturn image, then it's bigger than all three of my views.
Really?
Yeah,
Let me see. Is your collection view, let's see, is your collection view cell,
I'm just sharing my screen.
collection view, and then, because it could be, okay, is your, if you go to your collection view and then you go to your attributes inspector, what does your layout say? Does your layout say flow or custom?
Flow.
Okay, it says flow. Okay, good. And then how are your constraints set up? Or more so, what is the size of your, it could be the size of your image as well. What's the size of your image? Is it bigger than?
Huge, yeah.
Yeah, so you might want to like just make it smaller just by like kind of pulling in the sides a little bit. Yeah, make sure this is selected and then kind of, it can get annoying to play with. I'm gonna zoom in more. And it could even be.
Okay. So it looks like I had to just manually resize my collection view cell.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes you kind of have to like play with it a little bit to get it just right. Is your aspect ratio and everything still set up?
One. Oh, let me double check. It's still set up. It was 1:1.
Yeah. So
The constraint's still there.
so if anyone else is having that problem, you would look at your view hierarchy, click on your collection view cell, and then come over here to your size inspector, and then you have a width and a height that you can potentially change, and that'll change the size of your cell. And that'll show to be important going forward as well. So I'm going to run this as it is.
Yeah, it just threw me. For some reason, I was expecting that the collection view cells would stay like a set size.
So yeah, that's the thing about collection view. Oh, I have to add the view controllers first before I start trying to build. But that's the thing about view controllers. It gives you a lot of flexibility, and since it does give you more flexibility than a table view, you have to be like really careful with sizing things. So it's like it's a good thing that it gives you that much flexibility to like change sizing of cells and how it shows up on the screen, but it can be annoying in the beginning, but once you get the hang of it, it's very, very useful. So I'm going to introduce the associated view controllers view controller classes that I want for each of these view controllers, connect them, and then we'll go on our 5-minute break. So we want a view controller for our Planet collection view controller, and then we'll need a view controller for our settings, and then we'll also need a class for our custom cell. So I'm gonna do Command N. Ooh, actually, there we go. We're gonna get a Cocoa Touch class. And I'm going to look at the subclass of, and I want a UICollectionView controller. And I'm going to name this Planets Collection View Controller. Make sure it's in the right folder. So I want it in my View Controllers folder. Down here, make sure you come to your groups and make sure it's in the View Controllers groups. And that's where the file will go. And I'll click Enter. And so now I see I have my new view controller. I want to make one more view controller, and this will be just a regular, this will be just a regular UI view controller. So I'm going to need to change my subclass of again and have my regular view controller. And then I'm going to name this settings view controller. And it's already in my view controller group. Create it, and then I need to introduce that custom cell. So now I'm going to introduce my UI collection view cell, and I'm going to call it Planet collection view cell. And I don't have a specific group for that one yet, but I can create that one. So with my Planet collection view cell, and thinking about the MVC pattern, so that's model view controller pattern, where do you think the Planet collection view cell fits in that whole scheme of things? So this is our custom cell, and this will be the class associated with our custom cell. So we're in the model view controller design pattern. Where does my cell fit in all that?
I would think with view controllers.
Not quite the view controller, but close. It's
Is it a view?
Yes, it would be considered a view. It would, yeah. So a cell, so anytime you think of a cell, think of a view. So I'm gonna create a new group from that selection. And I'm gonna call it views. Okay, so now we have all our files set up, and the next thing I wanna do, the next thing I want to do is connect everything to its associated class. So we have this collection view controller. We'll go over here to our inspector, and then we'll change the class right here to our planet collection view controller. And then we have our cell. Make sure we have our cells selected by looking at our view hierarchy. Collection view cell, gonna select that one. Come over here and look for our planet collection view cell. And we're good to go with that. And then we have our settings view controller. We want to make sure that is selected and it is already connected to our settings view controller. Okay, so everything should be good to go now. I think I should be able to run it now. Oh, I know what I didn't do. Didn't do the most important part. So with the navigation controller, of course, you know that you have to have an initial view controller associated with that navigation controller. So here I come to my inspector that's associated with my planets view controller, and I come down here and I select is initial view controller. So now it should be fine. Okay, so it looks like it's fine. I don't know why my button isn't showing up. Okay, well, maybe once I fully, actually it should show up already. I don't know why it's not showing up yet, but we're gonna break for 5 minutes. So yeah.
Let's see.
Okay, so hopefully everybody is transitioning back to the computer. Our break is almost over. I want to make sure to show everyone, I don't know if anyone saw on the break, that I made this view controller the initial view controller when I should have made the navigation controller the initial view controller. So that is why it wasn't originally showing up. Sorry about that, you guys. So yeah, now we're actually able to see our UI view controller with our bar button that transitions to the settings view controller. But you see that we don't see our cell on the screen or anything of that nature. But we're about to set that up shortly. So the first view controller that I want to start with is our settings view controller. So we're going to click option and then click on that view controller file to the left. And this will create that split view. And so, you know, when we create the split view, what's about to happen, we're gonna start creating some outlets and potentially some actions. So the first thing I want to have reference to in order to going back to the original planets. Okay, I need the original planets. So, and going back to our final potential final application, we see our settings view controller and we see this toggle right here and it goes on and off. So we definitely want to make sure we have a reference to our switch. And so I'm going to click control, click on the switch, and then create my outlet. I want to name my outlet should show a Pluto switch because it determines whether Pluto should be shown or not. So should show Pluto switch. Remember the point of our names is to be very descriptive so that we know what it does and others that read our code know what it does. The next thing that we want to happen here is I'm gonna actually get rid of some of this commenting here because I don't need it. Don't need this either. So I'm going to drag another I'm going to create another outlet. Well, in this particular case, it'll actually be an action. And this action will be related to changing whether that Pluto should show up or not. So I'm gonna call this one change Pluto, change should Pluto show. Change should Pluto show. Oh, that's not. Change should Pluto show. So this will change the value of should show Pluto. It's a lot of similar names. Sorry about that. And then we actually want to create an action associated with this done button so that when our user clicks done, it exits out of the settings view controller. So done button tapped. And notice how each action name reflects an action. And of course, again, that is for readability purposes. So now that we have those set up, I am going to go to my table view cell. So I'm going to open up this drawer over here, and I'm gonna go to my Planet Collection view cell. I'm sorry, I called it a table view cell. We're actually working with collection view cells today. Sorry not to confuse anybody about what we're working with today. So I'll click on that. And since we're already in a split view, it should remain in the split view. And from there, I'm going to look at my collection view, my custom collection view cell. And since we already connected this custom collection view cell, I'm going to create some outlets associated with my image and my label. So this will be my planet image, planet image view, okay. And then my planet label, planet name label. All right, so I have those two set up just as we would with a table view, so that every time we create our cell, we have access to the image and the name. And so now I'm gonna go back to my settings view controller. And in my settings view controller, I want a couple of things to happen. I want to be able to keep up with this toggle right here, whether it's on or off. And I want to be able to exit out of this screen and click this done button. So first I'm gonna start with my done button. That'll be a simple dismiss. Hopefully you guys remember that if you want to remove a view controller, then you use this built-in dismiss button, and you can get rid of the handler completely, or you could say dismiss and put nil. Either way will work. So now when I click my done button, it'll dismiss the view. The other thing that I want to happen here is I'm going to want to capture what's going on with my should show Pluto switch. So every time something happens with my should show Pluto switch, I want something to print so we can notice how that switch works. So I'm going to put, I'll just use the should show Pluto switch and I'm gonna use is on. And so this is on Boolean is going to give me the information that I need that tells me whether the switch is on or off. So now when I run the application, I'll go to my settings view controller and I can click done and it'll dismiss the view. And then if I begin to click the toggle or the switch for the Pluto, I can see that Pluto is false because it's turned off. And then Pluto is true, which means it's turned on. So we have that working. The next thing we want to do is go to our Planet Collection View controller. So now that I have the basics set up with my settings view controller, I'm going to go to my Planet Collection View controller. And this is where we're gonna start building out our collection view that holds all our planets. So we don't need our storyboard anymore since this is already connected to our storyboard, so we can get rid of that. And so now we can completely focus on our UI collection view controller. So with our UI collection view controller, we see that since we use a Kosoko touch class, it already has some information in it. And a lot of this information that is given me right now, I actually do not need. For instance, this right here, I don't need this because since I already built out my custom cell in the storyboard and it already has a relationship with my collection view, my UI collection view controller, I don't need to register the cell because that's already handled right here in the storyboard. So I'm gonna go back to my Planet Collection View controller and I'm gonna delete this line of code because it's not necessary. And then, but I'll start looking at the rest of this. I don't need that. I don't need this information. I will need this data source, these data source related methods or these data source related methods. As you'll notice, is very similar to the data source that we use for UI table view. So hopefully you guys remember, but the data source for UI table view controls the data that's populated on the UI table view controller. So much like that, this has the same thing, but it's a UI collection view data source, as you see right here. And these are the methods that are associated with it. So we have the number of sections. So this will give the number of sections that we need, and then it's the number of items in each section. And then we have our area where we actually produce our cell, potentially our custom cell. And hopefully this format kind of looks familiar to you guys because it's a lot like the UI table view. The next thing I want to focus on is I really don't need this method. So I really don't need this number of sections method because we're not dealing with multiple sections. We're more so dealing with rows. So that's where this particular method comes into the number of items in each section. It's really just referring to like a similar concept of rows, but since UI collection views can either be, vertical or horizontal, or it has that whole grid system. That's why it says number of items in each section instead of rows. So I'm gonna get rid of that. And I also don't really need to do, if we look at the original application, if we look at the original application, nothing's happening when I'm clicking on these cells. So I don't really need a cell. I don't really need a UI collection view delegate because just like the UI table view delegate, remember that would give us access to allow certain things to happen when we click on a cell. But since nothing's really happening when we're clicking on these cells, I don't really need anything UI collection view delegate related either. So I'm gonna get rid of this information as well. But you can see all the methods that are related to it. So should select item at, should show menu for item at, can perform action. So these are all action related methods to each UI collection view cell. But again, we don't need that for this particular application. Okay, so now that we have all the methods that we need for now, in order to populate those planets onto my collection view, how would I get access to my planets? Does anybody remember where the planet information was?
In your planet, that model controller you have like the array of planets in there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in my planet controller, I have this array of planets. And so hopefully you guys remember, but in a model view controller pattern, you have a model controller, and the model controller will handle all the data. So how do I create that connection between my planet controller and my planet collection view controller? Anybody remember how to create that connection between the model controller and the view controller?
You need to create a variable to call the model controller.
Exactly. So I want to create an instance of that controller. So let planet controller equals planet controller. So here's my instance of my planet controller. Now I want to potentially get access to all of those planets in my planet controller. So if this is the area in which I return the number of items for my collection view, how would I get access to the number of planets?
Planet controller.planets.count.
Exactly. Thank you. I called it plant controller. Okay. Planet controller dot planets dot count. Exactly. Okay, now that we know the number of planets that we want to show up, now we want to get access to our custom planet collection cell so that we can configure it and show it on our collection view. So hopefully this kind of like looks familiar to you guys because it's very similar to how you do it with a UI table view. But this one is specifically for a collection view. So right here, it has a reuse identifier, and this reuse identifier is this thing up here, which also reminds me, I did not create a reuse identifier for our custom cell. So I'm going to go back to the storyboard and create a custom identifier for our custom collection view cell. So I'm gonna go to my view hierarchy, click my planet collection view cell, go over to my utilities area, look for my attributes inspector section. And then right here you see identifier, and this is where I'm going to add my reuse identifier, just like you would for a UI table view cell. And I'm gonna call it planet cell. So the name of my reuse identifier is planet cell. I'm gonna capitalize that. Planet cell. So now when it'll make it much easier for me to be able to call my custom cell onto my collection view. So I can either just replace this string entirely, or I can replace what the value of this reuse identifier is. I'm just gonna get rid of it entirely and just put it in here. So I'm gonna call it planet cell because that's what my reuse identifier is for my custom collection view cell. And so now we have our planet cell, and now I know that I want to potentially put data into my collection view cell. So how would I get the data to put in my collection view cell? Does anybody remember?
You have to call the index that item of the cell.
Yeah, okay, yep. I definitely want to use my index path.
You have to make that cell equal to the that planet, that custom cell that we created. Be like a guard led, kind of like we do with the table.
Exactly, yes, we do want to do that. So we're going to, well, before I even put the guard, I'm going to cast it as our custom planets collection view cell. And I want to make sure I unwrap it using a guard statement. And if it doesn't exist, I'm going to introduce a fatal error that says cell does not exist. Cell type does not exist. The other thing I want to be able to do is actually put the data in that cell, right? So I'm going to go to my cell and see what's accessible. So I have a planet image view. So in order to get that image view, how do I get that data?
I think it's UI image and just call the image.
Yeah, so how am I getting access to that actual image though? Like where's my data being held? Remember here, we were able to get access to the—
You can call the planet controller that planets and then call the index path that item.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we're gonna get our planets, we're gonna do the index path, dot
Item.
row, dot row.
The row?
Yes. And then, I'm sorry?
No. All right.
And then we're gonna get our image. So,
But first, don't you got to do the image view.image? Yeah.
yes, yep. Thank you for catching that. And then we have our name, and we're gonna do the same thing with our name. All right, so now our cell is set up based off of our data that's in our planet controller. So going back to our planet controller so you can kind of see. And also just so you guys know where these images are coming from, this image name in our planet controller is going to go to our model, our planet model, and it's getting it out of our UI image. And the way it's able to do this is because we have this thing called an assets folder. So I don't know if you guys are already familiar with this. I know I haven't really talked about it in class, but this is the assets folder. And in the assets folder is where you'll find the Earth, the Jupiter picture, the Mars, Mercury, Neptune, all of those pictures are within here. And in order for you to access those images, notice that each image has a name associated with it. And in our planet model, we're accessing that image right here in our UI image name and passing in that string, that image name string, and it returns our image from our assets. So now when I run the application, we see our image. So you see, exactly. Exactly. So remember earlier I kind of told you it gives you a good collection views give you a good amount of flexibility with sizing and everything like that. But that's also why you kind of have to like be careful with how your constraints are set up. So I'm gonna go back to the storyboard and correct how this looks. So if I go back to the storyboard, I can make my cell a little smaller. And another thing I could do is constrain the width of my cell and of my, not my cell, but my image. And if I constrain the width of my image, it'll make all the difference. Because remember, our aspect ratio is set up to be 4:3 or 1:1. It's actually supposed to be 1:1. So I want to go back and change that. Image view, size inspector, come down to the aspect ratio, and I'm going to edit it and change it to 1:1. So now that our aspect ratio is set up to be 1:1, and I've constrained the width to be 148, hopefully this should allow for us to have that set up where the planets were on, it had 2 planets on one row. So let's see what it looks like now. There we go. So now we have all our planets set up, and they all look good, and exactly as we expected. So notice how in a collection view you have to be very careful with the constraints of the content of your collection view cell, because that'll determine the size of your overall cell, and it'll determine how everything is laid out. Because if not, it'll try to grow as much as it can, and that's how you end up with the original result that we had. Is everybody good at this point? Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Well, before we move on from UI collection view and transition into user defaults, I want to make sure that I re-go over the objectives and make sure that you guys understand everything that's going on. Do I have my keynote? Oh, I guess I closed it. Okay, I'll just go over the objectives here. So hopefully you guys have an understand and it can explain what a collection view is, along with common scenarios for its use. So a collection view, we talked about an example of a collection view, which was Instagram. With Instagram, you wanted a certain grid layout for the pictures, or you wanted a horizontal collection of views. UI collection views gives you that added flexibility. And then the way it's able to give you that added flexibility is through the UI collection view flow layout. And then we just introduced data to our UI collection view using some UI collection view data source methods. We created a custom UI collection view cell, and we know what a UI collection view delegate method is capable of doing, but we didn't have to use it for this particular project. So I'm going to, we're going to go on a break, our 5-minute break now. And then when I come back, we will talk about user defaults. Okay, I hope everyone's transitioning back to their computers. Break is almost over. And I also want to check to see that everyone has gotten to a good place with the application. Um, I hope everyone's application looks like this thus far. Please let me know if it doesn't. All right, break is over. So like I said, please let me know if your application doesn't look like this so far. If you run into any issues, please let me know. And if you have any questions, please let me know now or send them to Slido, of course. Okay, if no one has questions, I'm going to move on to user defaults. So for user defaults, we have three main objectives. We want to understand and explain the purpose of user defaults and the kind of information that should be used to store, define keys for specific values stored in user defaults, and use user defaults to store and retrieve preferences. So user defaults is a key value pairs persistent store. So remember last week when we went over plist and how they help us to persist data between app launches. Well, this is another way that you can persist data. There's the main ways are the way I just showed you last week with the file manager, user defaults, and then in the future you guys will learn about something called core data. For user defaults, though, you have to be very careful with what you put in user defaults because you never want to put any type of sensitive information. When you go out to interview, this will be one of those kind of gotcha questions like, oh, what kind of information would you put in user defaults? Potentially. It's not guaranteed that you'll be asked this question, but this is definitely a potential question. And the only type of things that you should really put in user defaults is like user settings. So for instance, we're using settings for this application, and it basically is holding whether the Pluto should show or not. Or in the case of Instagram, your settings might contain whether you're signed in or whether whether your page is private or not, things of that nature, things that you would find in your profile settings would be saved in user defaults. So with user defaults, in order to call upon user defaults, you're going to need to use this static standard, and that's how you'll gain access to the default user defaults object. And from there, you have the ability to get default values or set default values. And of course, you can remove and other things of that nature. But the main thing that we're going to focus on is getting default values and setting default values. So when we set a default value, depending on the type of value we want to set, you have access to set in any object, a float, a double, pretty much anything in the standard Swift library in terms of type. And you're going to pair it with a key. The key is going to be a string. And you want to make sure that when you're trying to get or set anything, that you're utilizing the right string, because if you don't utilize the right string every time, it won't know what you're talking about and it won't be able to access that information. And then of course you want to have the ability to get, and you're going to get it based off that key. And that's why that key, having the correct key is so important, because when it's time to grab something from user defaults, you want to make sure you have the right key or you won't get anything. And that's why the return values on these methods are optional, because it could potentially not be there if you don't put the right key in, or if you didn't set that user default yet. Okay, so any questions on user defaults so far before we get started actually using them? Okay, so the main reason we want to use user defaults is because we want to keep track of this settings where it says, should Pluto be a planet or not? So we want to be able to say, yeah, it should be a planet, or no, it shouldn't be a planet, and then make it show up accordingly. So in order to do this, we need to go to our settings view controller, and we want to capture the value of this switch, because this switch gives us a Boolean that we want to capture. And if it says true, we want it to show the Pluto planet. And if it's false, we don't want the Pluto planet to be shown. So we're going to come here to our changes should change should Pluto show. So it's going to change our should Pluto show value on our so it's going to change based off the switch. So every time we click the switch, it'll trigger this action. So hopefully you guys remember, but this print statement, every time you click this switch, print a value. And that's really just to show you that it is capturing that value on that switch, and that and that the action is connected, basically. So now we're gonna use this action to utilize user defaults. So first we're gonna call upon user defaults. So that wasn't a good name. Let me see. Defaults. I'm trying to potentially set a Boolean, but before that, let me call the actual user default object. So remember that this standard gives me access to a user default object. Once I have that set up, I can set my Boolean. And so remember, when getting a default or setting a default, this is where you're gonna come and do that. So it says, in order to set a Boolean, I need to call set and then attach it to a key. So here I'm going to set, and I'm going to go capture my Boolean. So I'm going to use the sender. The sender is this UI switch. So I'm going to use the sender, and I'm going to do is on.
You got to just put the sender to, it's on any right now, change it to the UI switch, and then you'll be able to.
Oh, thank you. Yes. And so hopefully you guys understand why that needed to be changed to UI switch in order for me to have access to that is on. So now it does exactly, it gives me the same information as this line does. So so first we're setting our user defaults to is on, and now we want to create our key, right? So our key is going to be something like, should Pluto show? But since we have to be really careful with our key, it's probably not in our best interest to just have a string just laying about, because every time we want to access our key, every time we want to utilize our key to access our value, we could potentially have a typo or something of that nature. And if there was a typo involved, then we wouldn't be able to access the right information. So to avoid mistakes like that, we could potentially introduce an extension to string. So I'm going to show you how that would actually work. So I'm going to create a new file, just a regular Swift file. And I'm going to call it, or key. I'm going to call it key. Let me turn off this. And call it keys. And this will be an extension off of the string library. And I will have my show Pluto key, and it'll have my value that I was just about to put here. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to put it back. I'm going to assign it to this value. So now I have a new static variable that is associated with string. So not sure if you guys are familiar with static variables, but a static variable basically means that I do not have to call an instance of the string object. I can call it directly onto the class. So I'll show you an example of that right now. So usually if it wasn't static, I would have to call an instance of string, which would basically look like something like that. And then I would have to call string and then go from there. But since it's a static variable, I don't need to do all that. I can do this. I can call string, and then I can call my show, forgot it that quick. My show Pluto. So show Pluto. It's not popping up yet, so I'm okay. Show. There we go. My show Pluto. So the other cool thing is, since this for key is already expecting a string, I don't even have to call string, because it's already inferring that what you're passing in is a string. So it's gonna grab it from that that string object. So now we have our show Pluto key. It's right here in our string extension in our keys file. So if we wanted to add other keys, we could just add it right here in this file and call it the same way. So now every time that we click on this switch, it will now set that user default for that show Pluto key. Okay, and so now we actually want this key to do some things for us. So let's see. In order for us to get that Pluto to show up, I'm gonna first look in my model controller. So you'll notice in my model controller, I don't have a Pluto object. I don't have a Pluto model object. I have all the other planets here, but I don't have the Pluto one. So what I'm going to do very quickly is convert this array, just this regular array, to a computed property. So hopefully you guys kind of remember computer properties. Remember that a computer property enables you to do some calculations within the declaration of a variable. So I'm going to create another planet. I'm about to delete this one in a second, but I'm going to create another planets variable. I'm going to make it of type planet. And I'm going to make it optional. No, actually, make it regular variable. So now I want to have my little temporary variable inside because I'm about to do some calculating and I want to be able to return something. So I'm going to call this results. And I'm going to take this array up here. And this is going to go in my results array. And I actually want to make this a variable, not a constant. Because I want to be able to have access to change it. So after I have my results, I want to be able to return my results. And now I can delete this variable up here because I don't need that old one anymore. Use of declared type planet. Oh, planet singular. Okay. So here is where I want to do some calculating because right now we're really just returning this array, but I want to determine some things before I return this array. So I want to go back to where I figure out how to get my user default variable. So it looks like I would call my user default object and then I would do Boolean since I pass in a Boolean to my user default. So I would do let should Pluto show, and I would call user defaults standard Boolean. And then remember we have that handy string. So now this line of code will give me a Boolean that'll tell me whether I should show the Pluto or not. So if I want Pluto to show, I need to add some logic for Pluto to potentially show. So I'm gonna do if should Pluto show. I want to get this results array and I want to append a new planet object. I'm just gonna copy one of these objects real quick. Well, no, I'll just create one from scratch because I don't wanna make it look confusing. So I'm gonna create a planet object. And with my planet object, I'll have Pluto as the name and Pluto as the image string. So now, every time that we call upon our planets in our model controller, so every time we call upon our planets data, we're going to ask it, should Pluto show? And so now when we go to our planets collection view controller and we're utilizing our model controller in these planet, and it's accessing our planet controller within the logic of setting up our collection view, it'll ask it, do you want Pluto to show or not? So there's one more step that I want to happen. And that I want to go back to my settings view controller. And when I come onto my settings view controller, so when I click onto it right here, it has it either toggled on or off. And I want this to be on or off based off what is already in my what is already in my user defaults. So in order to make that happen, I need to go into my settings view controller, and instead of using view did load, I want to use view will appear. So now that I have that set up, I'm going to create a separate method called like update views. And what it's going to do is it's going to look at my user default. So I'm going to go and capture my show Pluto using my user defaults, just as we did in our model controller. Standard dot and I want it to control the value of my switch. So now when I come onto the page, it will check in my user defaults. Actually, no, it won't do it yet because I haven't put the method in view will appear. Now that I put the method in view will appear, it'll, as soon as it comes onto the settings view controller, it'll check in my user defaults to see if this value already exists. And if it does, it's going to have it show accordingly. So if my switch is on, then I know that my Pluto should be showing, and vice versa. I'm going to, okay. All right, so my whole settings view controller is set up. My model controller logic is set up. And on my planets collection view controller, I want to add one more thing. And here I also want to utilize, no, I'll put it in the view did load. So here I want to utilize my reload data. So remember on the table view, we had a method that could be called reload data. Well, we have the same thing here with our collection view. So we just call upon our collection view. Since we're using a UICollectionView controller, it's already built in. And we're going to put reload data. So now every single time we come to this planets collection view controller, we're going to call this reload data. And actually, I might want to put this in the view will appear. Well, I'll leave it in the view did load for now. Okay, so I'm going to build the project so everyone can see how my user default is working. So I have my collection view of my planets, and you see that Pluto is not visible at the moment. So I'm going to go to my settings, and I can see that my should Pluto be a planet is turned off. So I'm going to turn it on. And now I'm going to click done and go back and see if my Pluto is showing up. So my Pluto isn't showing up. So that means that something went wrong. And that is probably here where I called my collection view .reload data and my view did load instead of my view will appear. And that is where the life cycle of a view controller comes in very handy. So you may go into it in your future lessons, but for today, there's certain parts of a view controller life cycle, and they're called depending on what's happening with the view. And so for view will appear, that will be called every single time that that view is going to appear. And then view did load is called at another part of the life cycle, and I'll go into that in a second. So let's make sure that that resolves the issue. So I'm going to build the project. And we see that Pluto is showing because our user default is set up correctly. So it shows. So now when I go turn off Pluto, it shouldn't show anymore. So hopefully that is the case. And oops. Okay. Planets.count. This is due to something in our model controller logic. So I'm going to check that out. Planet controller, if results at append. Okay, results.
Does it know how to remove it by chance? Like, because we're appending it, right, with the switch on. When we turn it off, does it know to remove the last thing or whatever?
So this is calculated, since this is a computer property,
Yeah.
it should be calculating this brand new every single time that it accesses the planets from the planet controller. So that shouldn't be the case. Yeah. Yeah, that shouldn't be the case. What I'm thinking is red constraints, this layout. Maybe it's what.
This index out of range.
Yeah, so that means that it's trying to call something in the array that's not there anymore. So it could, our view will appear is working correctly. Our planet controller. I'm gonna try this one more time and see. Okay, our Pluto is gone. Okay, our settings are off. Turn the settings back on. Okay, so it's still not calling that. Okay, so let me put it back in the view did load. Collection view. That reload data. This. Okay, so our Pluto is showing up now. It's definitely something with where it's called in the life cycle. So I'm going to turn off the Pluto, and now see it keeps causing that issue. So it's having an issue because it's trying to call that cell, but it has no information to give it because that planet, that planet in our array doesn't exist anymore. And I'm trying to figure out why the timing is off. Did it load view? This, yeah, no. Okay. Okay, so, I don't know why it's giving me issues with that. But another thing that I could potentially do is create a delegate and do it that way. But that would require me to set up a segue. This honestly should just work. So for item index path dot row, planet controller, if planet controller, results dot append.
Don't you have the file for the finished project? Just go into that and just kind of compare.
Yeah.
Code in there.
Yes, that would be the best thing to do.
I'm sorry. I was working. What exactly is happening?
So, so basically, I don't know why. Okay. So basically, it was having issues with me calling the, reloading the collection view after I turned the switch on and off. So right here, Pluto's showing because the switch is turned on. I'm gonna turn off the switch, close it, and Pluto should no longer show. And for some reason, it's creating an out of bounds error because Pluto shouldn't exist in that array anymore. And that logic is set up here in the model controller. And since it is a computed property, it shouldn't have an issue with setting that up. And I'm calling this collection view dot reload data as soon as the
You've got it in viewed load. When are you reloading the data after you dismiss that settings view controller?
After I dismiss the settings view controller. I'm right here in the view did load. Would it like
View did load doesn't get called again.
it? Okay.
View will appear and view did appear would get called, but only if the modal segue went full screen.
Oh, gotcha.
For a partial modal segue like that, you either have to use a delegate or there's like a special new system built-in delegate. I can't remember what the name of it is. But if you make that modal full screen and then use view will appear, then you can reload the data there.
Yes, I totally forgot about the full screen. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna come here to the segue. Okay, so come back to your storyboard. Yeah, totally blanked on this one. Sorry, guys. So come back to your storyboard and go to your segue. And you're going to click on the segue between the planets collection view controller and the settings view controller. And you're going to go to your attributes inspector, and you're going to come down to your presentation. And for the presentation, you're going to do full screen, just as suggested by Sean. And now when I call the view will appear method, view will appear. Okay, so now you have your planets, and of course Pluto is turned off. So now when I turn on Pluto, click done, it exits, Pluto appears. Thank you so much, Sean, for that. I totally about the
The
totally,
setting again and turned it off really fast. Like,
I'm sorry. Oh, you want to turn it off?
yeah, turn it off, and then does it?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
So yeah, so that's a really important part. The full screen on the segue transition in the storyboard. And as Sean mentioned, there's another way where you would create a segue and a delegate combination. But I kind of wanted to just show you guys like an easier path, but totally forgot about the full screen. And so that's why it wasn't working in View Will Appear earlier when I used View Will Appear before. So yep, that is user defaults and UI collection view in a nutshell. Do you guys have any questions in regards to this?
Ayanna, can you show your settings view controller, please?
Yes, sir.
You see, oh, down there on the update views.
Mm-hmm.
Like in my case, I actually had to type the whole like show Pluto switch that is on equal show Pluto dot bool, and then I had to actually put the key for key.
Interesting. Okay.
Or if I type it the way that you type it, it gives me an error.
Okay. Did you try Command B? Because originally it wasn't acknowledging that extension until I built the project. Also, is your extension set up this way?
Okay. Sorry, my internet is horrible today.
No worries.
Yeah, let me see again the settings. I'm sorry.
So you do have your extension set up like this?
Yeah, I did build an extension.
Okay. And then, so now are you able to do it that way?
I mean, I haven't as a started bar my extension, but
And you did and you tried to build the project using Command B?
oh, no, my project works. That's not a problem. I'm just curious because if I type it the way that you did, I get an error.
So you might even have to exit out of your Xcode. What's probably happening is your Xcode isn't registering that that variable that you put onto that extension. That's most likely what's happening. But that's the only like scenario I can think of why that wouldn't work.
Could be. That or your computed properties, your computed property setup in the array. Let Pluto show in your.
Well, that wouldn't affect whether he could call this like this. So he's trying to.
No, it's the last one, the last line. That one, the one.
Oh,
that
right.
one. Exactly.
So which part of this is giving you an error? This, do you have that outlet set up?
Yep.
Okay. Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can share with the, okay. Can you see it?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I mean the app runs perfect. That's not a problem. It's just that over here, if I try to go like that, it was giving me errors all over.
Oh, that's because you weren't giving it a value. So you had to you had to actually go and get the Boolean.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just wanna, why yours is different?
You wonder why mine's what? I'm sorry.
Yours is different. I mean, you don't have to type the value.
Bool after your user defaults. User defaults.standard.bool. You forgot to do that.
Yeah, it looks the same.
No,
it
no,
looks
it's different. It's different. If you look at his function right above it, it's the same thing. User defaults.standard. You got to do .standard dot below in your update views. You got to do .bool for key .show Pluto. That's what I got in mind. Right below that, go to your function update views. User
Right here.
yeah, dot bool.
So you pretty much put it on,
right there.
on the first line, so you don't have to put it on the second one.
Yeah.
Okay, now I see. Okay, gotcha.
And put the show Pluto on there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Gotcha.
There you go. Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Then,
What's up?
well, you just changed the constant to show Pluto. That's the reason why I was doing it. You have it let user defaults. Yeah, change it to show Pluto. And then you do dot is on equal show Pluto. That's what she had written down.
Yeah.
Cool. Any more questions?
Cool.
The user defaults. I'm trying to just wrap around anything to user defaults.
So remember the plist that we created the other week in the file? It looks exactly like that.
Is that the same thing?
Mm-hmm. The key value pair.
Okay.
Awesome. We just don't have access to the same way.
Got it.
Ayanna, can you explain better because that one was something that I was having an issue for. So the whole full frame that clarify.
Oh, full screen?
Yeah, that one.
Onto your main storyboard, and then you go down to this segue between the planets UI collection view controller and the settings view controller. And that's what controls presentation. Well, in that modal presentation, would be considered a modal presentation. Wasn't full screen. So I'm gonna go back to what it was before, and I'll build the project and I'll show you the difference. So when it wasn't full screen, it looked like this. And so I could really move that down, or I could click the done button, but you see the cover, the entire screen when it presents modally. In order for present full screen, I have to go over here, make sure that the segue is selected, and come down to this presentation to full screen. When I come down to this drop down menu, select full screen. And so now when I build the project, it is full screen. So now that it's full screen, when I exit out of this view, and I go back to the Planet Collection View controller, since the screen completely covered up, when I go back to the other view controller, it goes back through certain parts of the life cycle of this view controller. So it would be here that it would, how it was able to call that collection view.reload data.
Okay, I get it. Thanks.
No problem. Any more questions? Okay, well, if not, everyone have a great evening. Yeah, if you have any questions, of course, feel free to reach out to me directly or all right, well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.